A 17-year-old high schooler just walked onto a professional track and beat the Olympic champion almost to death by 100th of a second. And what happened next will make you question everything you thought you knew about how fast a teenager is allowed to run. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand why coaches, commentators, and even the Olympic champion himself are saying this kid might be unstoppable. And there's a twist near the end of the story involving a dive across a finish line that nobody saw coming. If you love stories where the underdog refuses to know his place, hit that subscribe button right now before we go any further, because this channel breaks down the moments in sports history that feel impossible until they happen. And trust me, you do not want to miss what we cover next. Let's set the scene properly. Picture a track in Oslo, Norway, one of the most legendary stadiums in middle distance running. The lights are on, the crowd is loud, and on one side of the track stands a man who has built an empire out of the 800 meters. His name is Emmanuel Wanyonyi, 21 years old, from Kenya, and by the summer of 2026, he was not just good, he was the king. Olympic gold in Paris back in 2024. World Championship gold in Tokyo in 2025. 3 straight Diamond League titles. 12 Diamond League wins in a row across multiple seasons. This is a man who had broken 1 minute 42 seconds 7 separate times in his career, tying the legendary David Rudisha for the most sub-142 performances in history. When people talk about the 800 meters, they were really just talking about Wanyonyi. On the other side of that same track stood a kid who, just months earlier, was running quarter-mile relays for his high school team in Texas. His name is Lutkenhaus. At the time of this race, he had not even graduated high school yet. He was still a junior at Northwest High School outside Fort Worth. But something had shifted in this teenager's life in a way that nobody saw coming. And we are going to walk through exactly how it happened, because the build-up to this race is honestly just as wild as the race itself. Rewind to the World Championships in Tokyo the year before. Lutkenhaus and Wanyonyi were both there, but Lutkenhaus did not even make it past the first round. Nobody was talking about him yet. He was just another promising young runner in a sport full of promising young runners. But over following months, everything changed at a pace that almost does not make sense. He won the United States indoor title. Then he traveled overseas to Turin, Poland, and won the World Indoor Championship, becoming the youngest individual world champion in the history of the entire sport. Think about that for a second. Not the youngest American champion. Not the youngest in his age group, the youngest in the history of the sport at any distance, in any country, ever. Shortly after that, he signed a professional contract with Nike, all while still showing up to high school classes back in Texas. And here's the detail that should genuinely shock you. By the time he stepped onto that Diamond League track in Oslo, he had not lost a single professional 800-meter race. Not one. Every final, a win. But none of those wins had come against the king himself. Now here's where suspense really starts building, because before Lutkenhaus ever lined up against Wanyonyi, something happened that cracked the idea that Wanyonyi was untouchable. Earlier that season in Rabat, Morocco, Wanyonyi actually lost. Britain's Max Bergen beat him outright, crossing the line in 1 minute 42.98 seconds, while Wanyonyi finished behind in 1:43.56. The king had already been tested once, and he had not passed that test. So when Lutkenhaus arrived on the scene weeks later, the timing could not have been more dangerous for Wanyonyi's reputation. And if you think that is the most dramatic part of this story, just wait, because what happens over the next 7 days is something longtime fans of the sport are calling one of the most stunning weeks in recent track and field memory. Make sure you are still here for that part, because it only gets more intense from here. 3 days before the Oslo showdown, Lutkenhaus made his Diamond League debut at a meeting in Stockholm, Sweden, on June 7, 2026. Wanyonyi was not even there that day. He had just become a father for the first time, welcoming a daughter into the world, and he had skipped the race entirely to be with his family. So the spotlight in Stockholm belonged to everyone else. And Lutkenhaus, in his very first Diamond League race ever, sat in 6th place early on, calm, patient, not panicking even though he was surrounded by men with Olympic medals and World Championship medals around their necks. Then, with the race entering its final stretch, he started moving. He worked his way up on the outside, slid into 2nd place on the back straight, And the final 50 meters, he blew past Canada's Marco Arap, the man who had won Olympic silver in Paris just 2 years earlier. Lutkenhaus crossed a line in 1 minute 42.70 seconds. It was the fastest outdoor time in the world that entire year up to that point, and it was his first ever Diamond League win in his first ever Diamond League race. Arap finished second. Algeria's Slimane Mullah took third. Both of them had Olympic and World Championship experience that Lutkenhaus simply did not have, and none of it mattered once the race hit that final 50 meters. People who have watched this sport for decades said it was a kind of jump in performance level that almost never happens, at any age, in any country. But Stockholm was just the opening act. 3 days later came the real test, the one this entire video has been building toward, the Bislett Games in Oslo on June 10, 2026. This time, Wanyonyi was back, racing for the first time since becoming a father, and he had told reporters just days before that fatherhood had given him a brand new kind of motivation every time he stepped onto a track. Standing across from him was the same teenager who had just dismantled a field of Olympians in Sweden. If you are not subscribed yet, now is the time, because what happens in the next 60 seconds of this race is the kind of finish that gets replayed for years. When the gun went off, Lutkenhaus did something smart. He did not try to lead. He tucked in right behind Wanyonyi and tracked him through the first lap, patient, controlled, waiting for his moment like a predator stalking prey. With 200 meters left in the race, he made his move, surging past the reigning Olympic and world champion. And Wanyonyi did not back down for a single stride. He answered immediately, fighting back stride for stride all the way down the home straight. Two runners side by side, neither one giving an inch, the crowd roaring louder with every step. And then, right at the very end, Lutkenhaus made a decision that would define the entire race. As the finish line approached, he dove forward across it. The clock stopped at 1 minute 42.08 seconds for Lutkenhaus. Wanyonyi crossed in 1 minute 42.09 seconds, 100th of a second. That tiny sliver time was the entire gap between a 17-year-old high schooler and the reigning Olympic and world champion of the 800 meters. Marco Arap finished a distant third. Norway's Tobias Gronstad ran a personal best for fourth place. Australia's Peter Bol ran a season's best for fifth. Belgium's Elliot Creston, the very man Lutkenhaus had beaten for the world indoor title back in March, finished sixth. Almost every single man in that field ran a season's best or a personal best, just trying to keep pace with the two runners at the front. That alone tells you how absurd the pace at the top of that race actually was. Afterward, Wanyonyi explained how the race had unfolded from his point of view. He said he had taken out hard from the very start and led to the opening lap. But with 600 meters still to go, he began checking over his shoulder, sensing that someone was coming for him. He said his real intention going into that race had simply been to run a season's best, since the outdoor season was still young for him. Meanwhile, Lutkenhaus said the race had been incredibly tough, and that he had to dive for the line just to be sure to win, admitting he had not even looked at the scrapes on his body yet, but expected they would sting later. To beat the reigning Olympic champion, he said, meant everything to him. Here is a detail that adds even more weight to what just happened. Lutkenhaus missed the all-time Bislett Stadium meeting record by just 0.04 of a second. That record belongs to none other than David Rudisha, the current world record holder, who ran 1 minute 42.04 seconds at that exact same stadium back in 2010. A 17-year-old came within 0.04 of a second of a Rudisha record. Let that sink in for a moment. With that win, Lutkenhaus became the youngest man to ever win a Diamond League race at any distance since the entire series began in 2010. 2 Diamond League starts, 2 wins, 2 personal bests, set just 3 days apart from each other. His performance in Oslo moved him to a tie for 14th on the all-time world list for the 800 meters, among every man who has ever run the distance at any age, in any country, in the entire history of the event. He is now officially the 3rd fastest American 800-meter runner in history, trailing only Bryce Hoppel and Josh Hoey, 2 men with years of professional experience that Lutkenhaus simply does not have yet. And he did all of this as a high school junior, keeping a professional record perfect 6 for 6 in finals. But before you assume this story is already finished, Here's the part that keeps this entire rivalry alive and honestly makes the next chapter even more exciting than what we just watched. The gap between these two men was 100th of a second. That margin could flip the other direction just as easily next time they meet. Wanyonyi is only 21 years old, which means his prime years as an athlete are very likely still ahead of him, not behind him. And as impressive as Lutkenhaus has been, David Riddish's actual world record of 1 minute 40.91 seconds, set back in 2012, is still over a full second faster than anything Lutkenhaus has run so far. A full second in the 800 meters is an enormous gap. Two incredible races in 1 week do not automatically mean a changing of the guard. The real challenge for Lutkenhaus is proving he can sustain this level across an entire grueling Diamond League season, where the fields only get more dangerous as the summer goes on. So what happens next? Lutkenhaus still has an entire senior year of high school ahead of him this fall. But before that, his focus turns to the USA Track and Field Outdoor Championships in New York City this July. And looming even large on the horizon is the World Athletics Ultimate Championship in Budapest this September, where Lutkenhaus and Wanyonyi are expected to clash again, this time with even higher stakes on the line. And from everything Wanyonyi has said publicly, he is not rattled by this loss. He is hungry for a rematch. For one single week in June of 2026, a teenager from Texas walked into a sport dominated by grown men with Olympic medals, and he shook it to its core, beating Olympians and some of the very best runners alive by the width of a single dive across a finish line. The question people are now asking is no longer whether this kid belongs on the same track as these champions. The real question, the one nobody can answer yet, is whether the rest of the world can actually catch him before he gets even faster. And if you want to be here the moment that question gets answered in New York this July or in Budapest this September, make sure you are subscribed, because we will be covering every single step of this rivalry as it unfolds.